Michael Andretti plans to bring a new American manufacturer to Formula One. This is huge news. Let's talk about it. And social media was abuzz this morning when, frankly, one of the biggest bombshells in terms of American F1 news that I can remember came out today, with Michael Andretti saying, "We're proud to announce our Andretti global partnership with GM Cadillac as we pursue the opportunity to compete in the FIA Formula One World Championship." And this comes on the heels of FIA head honcho Mohammed bin Suleiman saying on Twitter, kind of cryptically a couple of days ago, "I've asked the FIA team to look at it launching an expressions of interest process for prospective new FIA Formula One World Championship teams." And we realized exactly why today in a follow-up tweet from Mohammed saying, "I welcome the news of Cadillac and the Andretti partnership, and the FIA looks forward to further discussions on the FIA Formula One World Championship expressions of interest process." Now, one thing that I think a lot of people jump to the conclusion of, and myself included, you start wondering about GM's other racing programs, because this is a significant strategy change than what we've ever seen from General Motors before. But Adam Stern talked to GM President Mark Russ, and they said today that they remain committed to IndyCar and IMSA, in addition to their ambitions to get into Formula One for the first time in its history. Michael Andretti has also said that F1 would not affect any of its pre-existing programs like IndyCar, which would give us the assumption, at least at the moment, that Andretti would not switch from Honda power plants in IndyCar, or in the worst case interpretation of that they would leave IndyCar entirely to go to Formula One. I don't think that was ever something that was on the cards, but I think in this video we're going to discuss a little bit more about the kind of long-term impact of seeing General Motors and Andretti Autosport team up in Formula One, because you can't think that this action will have any won't have any consequences on the broader world of motorsport. I think that's a bit of an ignorant take. But here's the thing that's amazing to me, and says to me that, yeah, Michael Andretti is actually going to get his Formula One team, because he has met every ultimatum that the FIA has set forth for him. And frankly, you know, these hurdles kept getting higher and higher for Michael Andretti. It went from just, have an interest, create a budget, and now it's gotten to the point where they're like, yeah, we need you to bring a new manufacturer in. And then he goes and does it. And it's a totally brand new manufacturer, which is the amazing thing to me. General Motors has, as far as I'm aware, and I like to think I have a pretty good knowledge on the history of auto racing, I don't think General Motors not only has never had an interest in Formula One to this extent, to the point where they would announce an interest in funding an entry, but I don't think a General Motors product has ever powered a Formula One car. I think that would be, I don't think it's ever happened. I mean, Chrysler and Ford have. Chrysler did it through Lamborghini, and Ford obviously has an immense history in Formula One, going back to the Cosworth engine way back in the 60s. So this is, you want to talk about big news? This is about as big as it gets when we're looking at the global motorsport landscape, and then especially looking at the American motorsport landscape, and saying one of the big three manufacturers who never had an interest in Formula One before, well, that's probably never had a public interest in Formula One before, never to this extent where they have announced that they have a team and are willing to jump in. There's so many questions. And I think a lot of people are asking, quite rightly, the question of where is this funding coming from for Andretti Autosport in Formula One? And behind the scenes, this has been known for a while, but not a lot of people have talked about it. I've seen more and more people talking about it recently. But if you don't know the name Guggenheim, you should learn the name Guggenheim. because the Guggenheim investment firm is really one of the big, really the big money behind Andretti Autosport and all their global functions. They're a major investor in Group 1001, a major partner there. They also own the Los Angeles Dodgers. And as far as I know, and a lot of other people within the sport know, they're the main reason why Andretti is building a large $100 million facility on the north side of Indianapolis. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out that when you're talking about a $200 million entry fee on top of the hundreds of millions of dollars it's going to take to put together a Formula One team, you need significant money behind it. And the Guggenheim investment consortium, I guess we can say, is really the driving force behind all of this stuff with Andretti Autosport going global. It's interesting as well. We were talking about GM entering Formula One, a thing that they have never done before. That makes us begin to ask a lot of questions. Number one, power unit. Obviously, GM under the Cadillac brand is a car manufacturer. And generally speaking, when you bring a new manufacturer into a racing series, that generally means that they're going to build a motor at some point for Formula One. That is my interpretation of that. Now, when it will actually happen, I think is the question. Because number one, they have to get approved. And number two, we have to really understand what Andretti Cadillac's first season is actually going to be in Formula One. There are new regulations coming in 2026, and several manufacturers have already begun the process of building and designing their engines. Now, I think it would be foolish to think that this is day one for Cadillac on their F1 program. If they've gotten to this point where they're announcing something, they have, I would say, probably a pretty good idea of exactly how they would implement a Formula One program. But let's say they enter before the 2026 regulation changes. It would almost certainly have to be some sort of a deal where they badge a different manufacturer's engine. And there are two names that come to mind immediately when you start thinking about that. Those being Renault, and those, perhaps surprisingly enough, maybe not so surprisingly if you think about it, Honda. Now, Renault, you heard it here first, and I'm not actually, I'm not BSing on that. You heard it here first, because when I interviewed Mario Andretti, he confirmed to me in March, or actually February of last year, that Renault had agreed to supply the Andretti Autosport Formula One team when they got approval. It would logically stand to reason that if Andretti's coming to Formula One, they would still have that agreement with Renault. Renault only has one team on the Formula One grid right now that they supply. And they're the only manufacturer that only has one team that they supply. Even Ferrari gives their engines to Haas and Alfa Romeo. So it would be beneficial for Renault. It would be extra development, extra data to have an extra team on the grid. And the only thing I would question would be, what manufacturer is less likely to want a Cadillac badge on their engine, or at least on the bodywork over their engine. Renault, I don't think necessarily directly competes with Cadillac in really any sector. Honda does, though Honda does have some technology partnerships with General Motors that some people have brought up as a possibility that maybe even Honda, and the weirdest thing I've heard today, and when I heard the argument, I didn't even necessarily disagree that it was a possibility, but the idea that maybe Honda HRC or whoever builds the Red Bull power units right now would potentially build an engine for General Motors to put the Cadillac badge on. So essentially a Honda-built motor that we're going to call a Cadillac. I think that's very interesting, and maybe that would mean that maybe Andretti would essentially have Honda engines in Formula One, again with a Cadillac badge on the bodywork. That's a very curious thought, and one that I wonder where this is going to head. And especially when you consider like the IndyCar connection, the fact that Honda and Chevrolet are both the suppliers in that series, and they both have now technology partnerships. Seeing that partnership potentially going even further into a Formula One program, I think is very interesting. But again, everything that Andretti has said publicly to this point is that they've got a supply deal with Renault. So until I'm proven otherwise, I would think that Renault power units are going to be what's in the back of this car until 2026. And then I think we're going to see some sort of different technology from what's currently available in Formula One in the back of the Andretti Formula One car. Now, one of the other things a lot of people have talked about is the fact that many teams don't want Andretti Autosport in Formula One, namely Mercedes. And I've got that. I actually got that from the horse's mouth at one point. Toto Wolff is definitely not a fan of Andretti trying to join Formula One. But it's not. They're not the only team. I think you're looking at Renault, obviously, or Alpine, I guess if we're going to call them by their proper name. Alpine, and then the two Red Bull teams being Toro Rosso, or again, by their proper name, AlphaTauri, and obviously the Red Bull factory team themselves, likely in the thumbs up column for Andretti. But when you're talking about a new manufacturer and you look at the FIA, I have a suspicion that the FIA is going to twist some arms if it comes down to it. And I think it is going to come down to it. And I don't really think the teams are going to have much to say about it when the FIA says, okay, look, they're bringing in a new manufacturer. It's going to bring us in X, Y, Z amount of dollars. Sorry, we're going to allow for their entry. In fact, the Concord Agreement, which is the kind of thing that governs all of the teams, specifically states that there can be as many as 13 Formula One teams at one time. So really, when you've only got 10 teams, and the Concord Agreement that has been signed by the team says, hey, we can have 13, I suspect that the FIA is not going to force that contract to be honored. This is a significant investment from General Motors to Andretti. I think you got to think it in the hundreds of millions of dollars, especially when you consider the potential of them developing a power unit, or at least paying to develop, or paying another company to develop a power unit for them. This is a lot of money. And while they say at this time, when there isn't a program yet, they've only announced it, they have not been approved by the FIA as we sit right now. You think about their IMSA, IndyCar programs, World Endurance Championship programs, that's a lot of money that potentially could be pooled into F1. You also think about Ford coming in. And I don't necessarily think that Ford's going to build a motor, but they could certainly slap a logo on a Red Bull. And it's almost like Formula One's become this black hole for American motorsports, where all of what used to be spread out among many series is now getting sucked into Formula One. And I wonder how the next decade is going to progress as we've got General Motors, potentially Ford, more American tracks, more American interest in Formula One. What the next decade for American motorsports is going to look like. I think things are changing significantly and at a rapid rate. And I wonder where it's all going to end up, because I think there's a very real possibility that Formula One becomes the top form of auto racing in the United States. And when we think about that, that would certainly be a bombshell. And when you talk about an American team, American supplier, and we know there's at least going to be one American driver on that team, Colton Herta, maybe two, who knows? Could be an all-American effort in Formula One. A team that really the country can get behind could change a lot of things. This is huge, huge news. So I know you've already probably let me know what you think down in the comments section below, but if you haven't, be sure to do so. Also subscribe if you've gotten this far. You definitely want to hear more from me. Thank you guys so much for watching. Happy New Year, and I'll see you in the next video.